Do any of you all talk to yourself? How many of you answer yourself? Right? How many of you lose track of the fact that you think you're talking to yourself in your head, but you're talking out loud? Okay, just me? At least 5 times a day, Caroline will say, "What?" And I'll be like, "Oh, that was out loud?" Right? Just conversations in my head. Sometimes they're what Wendell Berry might call forethought of worry. I am rehearsing a meeting I'm going to and how I think the conversation will go. And sometimes I am reliving the meeting that went, well, at least in my head, embarrassingly, and trying to think through just how many ways I came across undignified and unknowing. And maybe that meeting was 12 years ago. Anyway, I'm rehearsing things in my head, and then I start speaking them out loud, and my wife starts thinking I'm talking to her, and she wants to, be a part of the conversation. God, in this prophetic message of Hosea, I think is having a conversation with God's self. But in this beautiful self-revelation, God has let us in on the conversation. Lots of folks right now are going to see the movie Wicked. Have you gone to see it yet? Oh, okay. We're not a movie-going congregation. But you saw it maybe at the Morrison Center because that was more cultured, right? Maybe a little bit more, right? Well, anyway, hearkening back from that to the Wizard of Oz, I have this image of the Wizard of Oz, right? When I say the Wizard of Oz, what do you see in your head, in your mind's eye? Someone said green, curtains, smoke. What was that, Toto? Yeah, well, the true wizard is Toto. We all get that. Other? Dorothy. What was that? His head. Oh. Thank you. That's what I'm waiting for, right? There is, in the great and powerful Oz, in the course of the movie, the reality that behind that curtain, it's just a little old man pulling levers to seem great. And I have this beautiful sense of we would all like in our lives to hide behind a curtain and put forward the sense that we are the great and powerful Oz, that we are wise and powerful and free from the disappointment when people turn their back on you. God has moments in God's majesty where that is the image we get of God. But that's not Hosea. In Hosea, God rips back the curtain. God doesn't even need Toto to do it. God does it God's self. And reveals this deep and aching heart. The deep and aching heart of a parent who formed you in the womb, who birthed you, who had a vision for you, and it was a vision for good from your childhood into your adulthood. The image of a God who desperately yearns that when their kids play a board game, they all get along. And that's not how it goes down, is it? We betray. We fell into love, and love hurt us. We play the board game and we're losing and we accidentally throw our money into the bank in a way that no one can continue to play the game. God is throwing back the curtain to show us that God's love for us is great. So great that God can't give up on us. No matter how hurt God is by all our unfulfilled promises. I will admit it. One time, I can picture myself on the quad at William and Mary going to class, and I'm pretty sure I said the words, I know this is hard to admit, God, if you help me pass this test, and God's heart and God's sense of justice wants to get almighty, wants to stand up in the pulpit and say, you betrayed me. And the law in the text tells me what I can do to you. That's where God is. God has built God's self up into that fervor, and then God says, but am I not God? I'm not no wizard pulling levers. I'm God. I'm not mortal. I'm not stuck behaving in the most base way I can imagine. I'm God, and I get to free myself from my own sense of betrayal and the anger it has engendered. And so I choose love. I choose again to fall on my face in love with this world, with this board game of life, and you who play it, my children, my friends. And so God sets aside the hurt of betrayal, gets vulnerable again, and falls, quite literally, into a manger, which is perhaps the most reckless thing God could do. I'm thinking about Aladdin when he says, phenomenal cosmic power, itty bitty living space. Imagine God so in love with us that God said, I'm going to take phenomenal cosmic power and come to you as a defenseless child. And y'all, we human beings are born pretty darn defenseless. And I think that's hard to contemplate. It's so hard to contemplate, we don't actually like to think about it or admit that that's really what is happening. We'll jump through theological hoops and play theological gymnastics to imagine that that's not the full presence of God in that little baby the drummer boy is playing for. And yet, I think it's the inevitable conclusion of the love given rise in the prophet Hosea's pull back the curtain and see how God's heart works. It's the inevitable conclusion that a God who loves the world that much would absolutely put God's entire life in our hands and say, this much is how much I love you. This much is how much I want to trust you. This is how we get thy kingdom come. Will you fall in love with my world like this? When 20-some years ago, I was in the process to be ordained 22 years ago. I was in a committee, and Presbyterians like to make lots of theological gymnastics and hoops, like all of us, that you have to jump through. And one of the people who was examining me to go to the next stage of ordination preparation said, can you imagine, you have to not be able to imagine that you could do anything else. And until this week, I've never liked that question. I thought it was the wrong question. I'm a person of a fair amount of creativity. I could think of a million things I could do. Like Nathaniel Hale, I wish I had more than one life to give my God. But I started to think about it in the lens of God, articulating here in the prophet Hosea, pulling back the curtain. And what God said is, there's no way I could do anything else but give my life to you in this way. It doesn't matter how jaded I am, how skeptical I am, how much I know that this will not be the thing that works. As much as I know that this is going to end in a cross and a tomb, as much as I know how painful it will be when Judas gives me that kiss, I can't give up. Because this is worth believing in. Because I love you. And that, 22 years ago, I think is what that minister was telling me. Are you willing to fall on your face in love with God's world and God's people, even the really annoying ones? That's what this is all about. Amen.